Thanks for joining us. This is part one of a two-part Sunday Law update that we're dropping this weekend, one today and one on Sunday. We're looking back at just some of the major prophetic developments from the month of May. 100 days into Trump's presidency and Project 2025, it's no longer just a plan on paper. The Pope has passed, Catholic influence is rising fast, and my brother? Well, he just spoke directly to Trump's Labor Department nominee. Across the nation, the political shift isn't just moving to the right, it's moving towards Rome. So the question is, where are we now in the stream of time, and how close are we to seeing prophecy fulfilled before our very eyes? All right, guys, let's get into it. There's a lot to unpack this month. James, you just actually had an interesting conversation with Trump's Labor Department nominee, so why don't we kind of kick off with that? What exactly happened there, and who is Jonathan Berry?
Yeah, so Jonathan Berry, he is been nominated for solicitor for the Department of Labor to replace Simananda, who resigned. And this nomination happened back March 31st.
Because he still hasn't been confirmed.
Yeah, no, he hasn't been confirmed yet. And a lot of us are watching because, hey, it's interesting to see the fulfillment of movements of this order and where they're going and paying attention to the signs of the times.
Now, is Jonathan Berry, so he's appointed by Trump?
Yeah.
Okay. And was he kind of nominated through Project 2025, or like who's pushing him as a front runner?
Yeah, well, Trump nominated him, but he wrote Chapter 16 of Project 2025 that talked about the Sabbath rest laws.
Oh, trying to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to increase pay on Sunday to basically sort of close down businesses that don't want to pay that extra money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I reached out. Boyden law firm didn't really have much to say. They're polite and kind, but didn't really have much to say. So I looked around, trying to see if there's any contact information to get in touch with him. And I found...
And this is the guy that we're talking about right here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Jonathan Berry. So I reached out and happened to find a contact number and figured, hey, why not give it a ring? Like, well, what's, what can go wrong, right? Gave it a ring and, no answer. And I was like, should I leave a message? And then I thought about it twice. I was like, yeah, sure. Why not leave a message? So I called back a second time and he answered. So that was kind of cool. I recognized the voice because I heard him on, YouTube and whatnot. I said, hey, Jonathan. He's like, yes. Like, kind of like, who's this?
Yeah.
And I said, hey, I'm a social media influencer. Kind of followed some of your work and just kind of curious when the nomination's going forward.
Yeah.
Don't mean to intrude on you at all. But, he really didn't know who I was. And so I felt like it would be wise to send a follow-up text to just kind of clarify.
Yeah.
So it was kind of cool to do that. So he might have that here. Before I wrote this text, y'all might think I'm crazy, but I wanted to write this first off. When you get somebody random who calls you, I guess some people, and I, working as I have, you run into people who are, kind of questionable.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to come across like that at all. I want to treat the guy with respect. And we're certainly not here to dox him or anything like that.
No, absolutely not.
And so I actually went to ChatGPT and I was like, based on this guy's resume, which I found online, what would be the most respectful way to address him? Like, what is the most respectful way? And it said, Mr. Berry, or in some cases, honorable. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start with that. Honorable Jonathan Berry. Thank you so much for taking my call. I apologize for any interruption and do not intend to cause any further intrusion beyond a brief reach out to help provide context for the call, unless you voluntarily wish to dialogue further. We as a movement have long opposed Sunday laws, but also even those implemented with exemption clauses as a step towards church-state tyranny. We have also long expected a movement like Christian nationalism to push for Sunday rest by law in the United States of America, and just recently passed out thousands of books called The Great Controversy in D.C. at the inauguration warning about such. We have long expected someone such as yourself to push for such movements, even should it not be you. At some point, someone will do it. We intend you no harm, but see the movements as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy and pray for you. Once again, I do not intend to intrude or cause you any burden, but rather merely to reach out once for clarity out of respect and concern, even despite disagreeing. You are in our prayers. Respectfully, James Bowen. I'm appreciative of his response. He said, James, thank you for the context, especially thank you for the prayers. I've spoken with Todd McFarland multiple times in his capacity as a lawyer for your church and would be glad to engage further at the proper time after I'm through the confirmation process. Jonathan, to me, that sounds like somebody who doesn't want to engage on this issue before confirmation hearing.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want anything to upset his chances of getting the absolute dream job.
Exactly. No. One of the things that I'll comment here, folks, for those of you who are interested in contacting your elected officials or doing something similar, there's actually a biblical principle here.
Yeah.
Show honor to all, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. 1 Peter 2:17. This style of writing is one that I think anybody who's interested in contacting an elected official, this would be the way that we ought to go about it. And actually, I was looking up a supplicatory letter of the poor, distressed churches of the valleys of Piedmont to the Marquis of Pianesa, the March 16th, 1655. And they wrote, the benignity and patience wherewith your excellency vouchsafe to answer the letters which we are emboldened to write to you, bearing date the 8th of February last, gives us some ground to hope that you will accordingly cast your eyes upon this present reply with all due reverence we present to you, to the end onely that we may better inform you of touching certain heads or articles, humbly begging your pardon for this our slowness, which the distance of places and the difficulty of assembling our people hath against our wills occasioned. We need people like Alonzo Jones to go up there and fight the battles of the Lord, you know? Right. There's certainly cases where we as a people are called to not become mixed up with political questions.
Yes.
Okay. In the issue of like the temperance movement, which you could argue, you know, this is very clearly we're getting into matters of God's law here. Yeah. He is trying to amend federal law, stepping into something that has the superscription of God, not of Caesar.
Yes.
This is something that we as a people ought to be reaching out. And folks, go to help.senate.gov. You can locate the ranking members there and reach out to the senators there.
I think one of the things that you have to think about with this kind of topic is, why is it important? How do we connect this with the historic Sunday law opposition that has been part of the Seventh-day Adventist movement? One of the milestones that we've recently gone through is Trump's 100 first days in office. And there's this article from NBC News that was talking about this man here, Paul Dans. And James, I'm sure you're familiar with Paul Dans. He was the former head of Project 2025. He kind of separated himself from it when it was becoming kind of a PR issue in the Trump campaign. But then what's interesting is what he kind of predicts for the future. He says, what's coming next is really a squaring off with the courts. This is going to certainly reach boiling point. So then you keep going and you look, and there's multiple other people. You remember Russell Vought, James?
Yep.
And there's some interesting statements here. I mean, ultimately, you need to have zealous advocates for MAGA in position and ready to face off with their counterparts. And then drop down that bottom red section. Looking ahead to 2028, Dan said there won't be a need for a Project 2029. What does that mean? What does it mean?
Sounds like they're trying to have Project 2025 be in fulfillment completely before there's another election.
So it sounds like they're trying to accomplish everything they want to accomplish, like in one go, basically.
Which is interesting because when Trump was running for president, he essentially distanced himself from Project 2025 and was like, oh, I don't really know anything about that.
Right.
I don't endorse that.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do.
But now here it is. Being fulfilled.
I mean, we saw, I think it was Russ Voigt who got caught with ProPublica with, I believe it was them, where they had a hidden camera and went and like interviewed him and questioned him about it. And the discussion behind the scenes was, oh, no, Trump's really on board with this.
Wow.
Like this was the plan all along.
Yep.
So it was just a PR stunt.
Yep.
It was just like, well, no, I don't know anything about him. I've never read it. I don't know anybody associated with it.
Well, and then like multiple Catholic influencers after Trump got elected came out and said, well, can we just now say that Project 2025 was the plan all along?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can go to project2025.observer And it basically shows how far they've come implementing the Project 2025 guidelines. And it seems pretty accurate if you go through, I mean, everything that he says here. Yeah, I mean, they're implementing it basically. And so they have this countdown if you go on the website, and it has like 1,360 days, 1 hour, 47 minutes until the end of term. And it's counting down. And I remember I looked a few days ago, and I think it was at like 30%. And since then, it's gone up to 41%. And if you go to the labor subsection, there it is, not yet started, but mandate time and a half compensation on a Sabbath. And so it's being tracked currently. Now, this isn't a government website. This is just some person who's tracking it, but it's part of it. Let's not forget that, right? Do you guys remember who this is right here? Alonzo Jones. You remember the whole argument that happened back in 1888? So this was the Blair Act. Anyway, it went before the Senate in the United States, and it was basically an implementation of a Sunday law. Now, Alonzo Jones went famously and fought and said, no, we do not need a Sunday law. What we need is no laws enforcing a day of worship, whether it be a Saturday law or a Sunday law or any other day of the week, because you automatically give preference to that people group. And I mean, what happens if a Muslim comes along and says, well, I want Fridays off? Well, and then a Seventh-day Adventist comes and says, well, I want Saturdays off. And then a Catholic comes along and says, well, I want Sundays off. Are we just going to limit our work days to 4 days a week? And so the thing is, well, then it makes it very easy to say, well, let's just pick up one day.
Yeah, I mean, the leaders of this movement have been talking over and over about synchronized rest.
Synchronized, yeah.
Yeah, and making very clear, you go to Jared Longshore, Timon Klein, some of the other, I think maybe even Douglas Wilson and some of the other movers and shakers. And one of the things that some of them have talked about is that we want to be very clear which day of the week we're going to reverence. And so that's narrowing it down. But furthermore, one of the things that I would say respectfully to the Project 2025 author, Jonathan Berry, he talks about it ever being a state issue, but I think he's kind of glossing over the fact that the reason why it's been argued and actually defended as constitutional, even from a federal perspective, and in other words, the door's open federally, is because Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 of the Constitution does reference Sunday rest.
I think it's important that we keep this quote in mind here. This is a quote by Ellen White, and it talks about, we cannot labor to please men who will use their influence to repress religious liberty and to set in operation oppressive measures to lead or compel their fellow men to keep Sunday as the Sabbath. The first day of the week is not a day to be reverenced. It is a spurious Sabbath, and the members of the Lord's family cannot participate with the men who exalt this day and violate the law of God by trampling upon his Sabbath. The people of God are not to vote to place such men in office, for when they do this, they are partakers with them of the sins which they commit while in office. We've seen this great push here. This was an interesting article. Religion is so back. The conservatives making Catholicism great again. One of the things it talks about is basically how across the United States government, we've seen this push back towards religion, even in pop culture. Do you guys recognize the man here right there?
Yeah, that's Russell Brand.
Yeah, Russell Brand.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's him at the baptism, actually, his baptism. He was baptized in the Thames River. So you've actually had a number of different people that are kind of social media influencers that have been converted, if you will. One of the things that he was promoting along with J.D. Vance was the Hallow app. And the Hallow app, actually, Little Light Studios has an excellent episode on the Hallow app talking about how a lot of the things that are inside the Hallow app, because it's this app that basically, it reminds you to pray and reminds you to do these spiritual exercises and that type of thing. But if you actually examine it closer, it's all from Ignatius of Loyola. Yeah. It's all these spiritual exercises that make you kind of say these mantras and things like that, basically pushing you towards a Jesuit Catholic version of prayer. And so this is the app that Russell Brand and J.D. Vance were both promoting. And one of the things that's interesting is J.D. Vance and, who else that is right there? Pete Hegseth.
Is that, no.
Yeah.
Do you remember this whole controversy that happened where they had the leaked text messages?
Yeah. Yep.
And it was like this huge, he might even end up losing his job as a result of it, just because of how bad of a leak it was. But basically they had this, I think it was just a press member that randomly got invited to the chat. Yeah. And look at how they're saying right here, Godspeed to our warriors, Pete Hegseth, J.D. Vance, I will say a prayer for victory. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is you're having this, here's another person, you know who that is? Candace Owens, yeah. So that's her converting to Catholicism. So you're having all these big names that are basically converting and saying, you know what, we do need to get back to God.
It's interesting. I was watching, there's a widely shared clip now on social media from Chris Tomlin the past couple of days. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with his CCM music, but he shared and it was been shared now like 34,000 times last I saw it, of worship in the White House. You got Paula White leading out. But the other individuals that I saw up front, Sean Feucht. Sean Feucht, one of the big clips that we had played from him probably like a year or two ago was where he openly confessed to, hey, Christian nationalism, guilty as charged. Do we want to make laws? Do we want to make Jesus like king and laws leading back to, like God? Yep, guilty as charged.
That's why we get called. Well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes. You want God to come and overtake the government. Yes. You want Christians to be the only ones that, yes, we do. We wouldn't be a disciple of Jesus if we didn't believe that. We want God to be in control of everything. We want believers to be the ones writing the laws. Yes, guilty as charged.
And while that sounds good, for a lot of people in regards to specifically, matters like abortion and other stuff that are legitimate problems in our society, the problem is that you got people like Joel Webben coming along and saying, well, we need to legislate all 10 commandments.
Adopt a distinctly Christian preamble, and then all the 10 commandments must be legislated. What we've done is we thought the second table of the law, so second table meaning commandments 5 through 10, the commandments of God that pertain to our horizontal relationship with our neighbor, like don't steal, don't murder, these kinds of things. We think that should be legislated by the civil magistrate, but the first table of the law, not that. But that's not true. And I'm not just talking about Old Covenant Israel in the Old Testament. You look at King Alfred. You look at Constantine. You look at Richard the Lionheart. You look at Duke Godfrey, who chopped a Turk in half diagonally with one swing of the sword. These guys, they legislated both tables of the law. That's where all the prosperity comes from, because you can't hang in midair these second table commandments of don't steal from your neighbor apart from have no other gods before me. Idolatry is the fountainhead of the stream. You cannot have an idolatrous people and yet somehow have a moral people.
It's not just a case of regulating outward, and this goes back to Jonathan Berry, it's not just a case of regulating outward civil behavior that they want to do. They want to step into the first table of the law and legislate morality in matters that bears not Caesar's superscription. They want to unite church and state and to compel you to worship their version of God. And that's more in common with the harlot who rides the beast in Revelation. That's in common with Catholicism that unites church and state and literally binds the silver and the gold keys, representative of civil and ecclesiastical power, with the red cord of unity on their flag.
Right. Aaron, do you know who this is right here?
Oh, it's Andrew Tate, or is that right? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Andrew Tate.
So what have you heard of him before? What is he known for?
I think he had a lot of, was it kickboxing?
Yeah.
Some kind of fighting like that. And then I think he's converted to Islam, right?
Yeah.
He's a Muslim now.
That's actually what he's talking about right here. Is he's actually talking about converting to Islam. So he's kind of dissing Christians here, and he's actually talking about how weak Christianity is.
Basically saying how tolerant Christians are,
right?
And,
they don't stick up for themselves. Right. They don't have any teeth, basically, right? And so that's his argument. Now he's got a lot of a lot of other issues. I mean, he's had some very inflammatory statements over the years, and I think he drives like supercars, and he's been known for his rather misogynistic statements at times and that type of thing. But what's interesting is this sentiment of a push towards conservatism and a push towards conservatism that is not weak is what we're seeing. You actually have that also with Catholics, actually. Younger U.S. Catholic priests increasingly identify as conservative. There was a study published by the Catholic Project at the Catholic University of America found that almost all priests ordained in 2020 or later described themselves as moderate or conservative. And this marks a stark contrast with the 50% of priests ordained in the 1960s who described themselves as politically liberal.
You know, I want to go back just for a moment to one of the things that he said is, you know, you need to stick up for yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, how was that, you know, example of just fighting for yourself exemplified in Christ when he came to this earth?
No,
like
it's not.
It was a case of self-sacrifice.
Right.
And loving your enemy and being willing to die for your enemy. It was the goodness of God that leads man to repentance.
Yeah.
Sticking up for yourself. Christ was the one who said, my kingdom is not of this world, for if my kingdom were of this world, then would my servant fight. Yep. They're part of a different kingdom. They're part of a kingdom of this world.
Yes.
And these are Christians very much who want to establish a kingdom on this world instead of looking forward to the kingdom not of this world.
Right. So this is Carolyn Levitt, and she is the United States press secretary for Donald Trump.
Oh, okay. Very good.
And what's interesting is what's she doing right here, right before her?
Lord Jesus, please give us the strength, the knowledge, the ability to articulate our words, have fun, and be confident in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Now, we got to be clear, folks. We're not dissing prayer.
No, absolutely not.
We're not dissing the public officials being able to practice their own religion. But our recognition here is that the climate, the temperature is changing.
Yes.
And we're starting to see more and more of not only what appears to be a genuine revival, at least from the perspective of some.
Yes.
But cloaked within that so-called revival, there's a call to unite church and state and to practice your faith by legislating your faith, being able to dictate it to others.
Right.
That's the problem. That's the concern. So we don't have a concern with the prayer. We have a concern with the fact that there's a movement afoot to come along and mandate. And that's where Jonathan Berry and others are heading down that direction.
Well, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about being a Seventh-day Adventist is we have this unique perspective where we are watchers. We watch and we see prophecy fulfilled. We watch and see as the world changes, and we can know what we're expecting for the future based off of prophecy. And so we know what's coming. And so that it's not a remark about, oh, well, somehow this is wrong, but it's just saying, look at the climate. Look at what's happening. You know, there's this interesting gentleman. He's an Italian academic, church historian, professor of theology. And so he's actually done a lot of different studies about the Vatican II for the American Academy of Religion. And some of his more recent statements have kind of piqued my curiosity. He says, for some, it's really the choice to join the last vestige of the Roman Empire. We need to save the West. That's why we became Catholic. Now, Aaron, what do you think about that?
Sounds like, I mean, what I take from this is that he's saying that Catholicism is more than just a religion, but it's essentially the savior to Western culture as we know it. Yeah. And without it, that the West will fall.
Now, historically, has the Roman Catholic Church been a proponent of, let's say, capitalism, the free market? James, what do you think?
Not so much.
Not so much. So is his statement here really true that the West, well, they just need to become Catholic?
I mean, not unless you're trying to go back to fascism.
Right.
In fact, you know, you can look at the Roman architecture and literally see the cleaver, okay, with all of the arrows bound around that cleaver, the fasciae of arrows that were bound together. And you've got basically all of these corporations that are kind of in bed with the one who wields the authority. And one of the interesting places that you can actually see such architecture is on the spire of the United States Capitol building.
Do you know in the Lincoln Memorial as well? It's interesting. So there's another article here. We know that President Trump is promoting religion in the government. He comes out and says it quite clearly here. Trump will do what evangelicals tell him to do for the most part in order to maintain power. Look what he tweeted here. He said, "We are together going to make America bigger, better, stronger, wealthier, healthier, and more religious than it has ever been before." So if we're more religious than we've ever been before, that's what his goal is. Does that mean that we're going to have laws implementing that? I think you have to, right?
Right.
I mean, how else is he going to achieve it?
That's how a nation speaks.
It's through its laws.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting in Revelation 13, and that's why I was trying to tell Barry is, Isaac Bacchus, John Bacon, some of these individuals recognized, and Protestants, of course, the Seventh-day Adventist movement and many others have recognized America as the second beast of Revelation 13 that makes an image to the first beast being Rome.
Yep.
Second beast being the United States of America that makes an image. And you can see this reflected in the architecture, the laws. We have a Senate, we have a House. These are principles and a form of government that came from Rome. Right. And so America kind of is very much mirroring Rome in many ways. But the ultimate mirror, and so many people have been talking about Constantine lately.
Yeah.
The ultimate mirror is to go back to Sunday rest.
Yep.
What Constantine implemented.
I think one thing to point out, going back to Revelation 13, is that second beast, and that's a lamb-like beast.
Yes.
Right? Who speaks like a dragon. And how does he do that? Through legislation, through religious enforcement, through laws.
100%. Yeah. We have a interesting article here. And this is actually, I believe this is in Germany. This may be actually translated from German, so it may not read perfectly. But over there, they have stores where it's nothing but vending machines. And so you can go inside. There's not a single person in there that's working. It's literally all just automated, the entire thing. And there's this article that says, "Do vending machines need Sunday rest?" They call themselves e-shops, vending kiosks, or smart stores. Some cities prohibit these stores from opening on Sundays. Is that right? They had this thing where they said, "Oh no, you have to close." Well, then there was this stipulation about them closing, and they kind of fought back against it, and they basically won, saying like, no, they can stay open. But then there was this kind of reaction to that. It's this back and forth, this tussle back and forth, basically. And the other side basically said, no, they need to be closed on Sunday. It says here, it's becoming increasingly clear that the store opening law needs to be tightened.
Yep.
So the question is, why? Josiah, why would they want to close a store that's employing nobody on Sunday? Why would they want to do that when there's nobody working there?
Well, yeah, it is interesting since it's just, machines. But, I guess if they're, going back to the biblical belief in how the Sabbath ought to be observed, where it talks about your manservant, maidservant and all those things, then I suppose you could extend that to machines. But also in the sense that, that there's business transactions taking place, even though there's no people there.
Right.
So I think that's another way of further restricting and making the day more holy, so to speak, and that there's no buying or selling going on, and that no work of any kind, even if it's, automated. So I think that might be, one I guess, thing that they might be using to justify that.
Yeah, this is a case where it's not about workers' rights. This is about a religious law, ultimately, that they want to advance. The Article 139 of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland reads, Der Sonntag und die staatlich anerkannten Feiertage bleiben als Tage der Arbeitsruhe und der sächlichen Erhebung gesetzlich geschützt. which is Sundays are to be ultimately protected for rest from work, but also for spiritual elevation. And so there's already kind of like a spiritual element that's in the Bundesrepublik Deutschland in Article 139. Where they haven't taken this yet is to prohibit rest on the seventh day. What we do know from Bible prophecy that the United States of America is going to lead out ultimately in imposing the mark.
Right.
And so what I see this as is Germany, but also the trade unions over there, Uniropa, you've got Verdi and some of the other ones are lining up and already marketing a more widespread Sunday rest prohibition for all of Europe to the members of European Parliament. So this is a case where they're setting up the groundwork so that when the United States kicks it off, it goes very quickly global.
It's going to go very rapidly.
Yeah, the framework's there.
You have further discussion here talking about this, basically. The FDP parliamentary group therefore now intends to introduce a bill to state parliament that would legally regulate Sunday opening hours for fully automated unmanned retail outlets. Here too, automated sales outlets were the driving force behind the change. So one of the arguments that they used is, well, let's say that a customer goes in there and they make an accident. Let's say that, they drop a glass of milk on the floor or something, clean up on aisle 3 type thing. And then somebody does have to go clean it up. So, but let's go forward. There's been some more news since then. What news has transpired?
And this is a Fox News Alert. I'm Ashley Strohmeyer live from New York. Somber news from the Vatican, especially following Easter Sunday, with word of Pope Francis has died. The 88-year-old pontiff had been hospitalized since February 14th when he was admitted to Rome's hospital after a week-long bout of bronchitis got worse.
Here is J.D. Vance talking about meeting with the Pope as in his last moments.
How does it feel like knowing you were maybe one of the last officials to meet with him before he died?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that. I mean, it's pretty crazy, actually. And obviously, when I saw him, I didn't know that he had less than 24 hours still on this earth. I think it was a great blessing. But I think he saw a lot of people. I think he affected a lot of lives. And I try to just, remember that I was lucky that I got to shake his hand and tell him that I pray for him every day, because I did and I do.
What did he say? He said he was lucky to have shaken his hand. It's interesting that he is the vice president. It's not like, oh, the Pope was lucky to shake his hand. It's, oh, I was lucky to shake his hand.
Yeah, he would not agree with John Adams back in the day regarding the Jesuits.
No.
John Adams was very, very much not happy about the Jesuits, resurfacing as a society. And here we have a United States president who's very, very different from that.
Yes.
And yeah.
So, and you had his funeral. This was, they put him in a casket. You can see all and we actually had an episode on Little Light Studios where we talked about all the sun imagery. You guys see the sunburst right there? Mm-hmm. The sun imagery is all over the place.
Purple and scarlet.
Yeah, yep, you see it there, purple and scarlet. The National Catholic Register actually talks about presidents attending the Pope, attending the Pope's funeral. What was interesting is how quickly, did you guys notice how quickly after Pope Francis' death, Trump said, oh, I'm going to go. I'm going to attend. Even though historically he's actually been at odds with Pope Francis.
Right. Yeah.
But now he went to it. And there's this little article on National Catholic Register talking about basically this push. And it was kind of interesting to read through it. It says up here, but not so many popes ago, such an announcement by an American president would have been unthinkable. For most of its history, the U.S. government sent no one to the funeral of the Bishop of Rome. As recently as 1984, the two governments didn't have formal diplomatic relations. It's always worth remembering how deep anti-Catholicism runs in American history. For a long period in our history, it would have been very odd for the leader of the Catholic Church to be treated with the honor of the American president going to his funeral. Nowadays, though, it's not that surprising, is it? Now we see it consistently.
When you think about how people came to America to escape religious persecution, they suffered in the old world. Mm-hmm. People like Roger Williams, for example, who lifted up principles of liberty for the Baptists, separation of church and state. Thomas Jefferson did write that letter. And these were some of the principles that made America great, that we had no king, we had no pope.
Right.
As Revelation describes that second beast of Revelation 13, having no crowns on those horns, there are no crowns there. We are a Republican government built upon Protestant principles. But the problem is that Protestants are drinking that wine and forgetting who they really are. Their identity is lost. And so now they're all joining back up with Roman Catholic principles.
The article goes on. It talks about the Protestant anti-Catholicism evident in the 1960 presidential campaign has gone into the dustbin of history. There's a secular anti-Catholicism today, to be sure, but presidents have learned to ignore with respect to events like a papal funeral. And so you look at, there's a long history of this, actually. And what's interesting is it was only until fairly recently that you actually had popes' funeral being attended by presidents.
Well, and you have this call for uniting Protestants and Catholicism. What is it? Who is it? Tony Palmer? Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's a big push for that, and it all just makes me think of, you know, Bible prophecy in Revelation 13, where it says the deadly wound will be healed.
It's interesting. Even though Tony Palmer died shortly after in a motorcycle accident, Kenneth Copeland has continued that crusade, and we see that heavily in his ministry, Flashpoint. You know, I think it's flashpoint.tv or something like that, where they had Marjorie Taylor Greene, they had other people who came through for some of their big conventions, and specifically calling for the Seven Mountain Mandate, but also the union of church and state, how we need to marry these two together, the sacred and the civil, and to unite those two. It's like book, chapter, and verse from the Great Controversy.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, that the Tony Palmer who you're talking about there, there's a clip. I mean, it's famous on the internet now, talking about, well, maybe you are all Catholics now.
We know that the first 1,000 years there was one church. It was called the Catholic Church. And the word Catholic means universal. It doesn't mean Roman. Catholic means, if you're born again, raise your hand if you're born again. You're a Catholic. Take back, redeem what belongs to you. We are Catholics. I've come to understand that diversity is divine. It's division that's diabolic.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if that's the particular quote, but I know I've read over the years several quotes from different Catholic leaders where they're basically calling out Protestants and saying, you guys claim to be separate, but look at this part of your worship or your different holidays, and that's all, you get that all from us, and so you guys need to come on home, and that's what that one guy was saying, about the saving the West, ultimately bringing that back to Catholicism. So there's definitely that push.
Come back to the mother church.
That's right.
Yeah, they say stop protesting, and once you stop protesting, well, you're a Catholic. So
they want that deadly wound inflicted by the French Revolution to heal, so that all the world wanders after the beast that was, is not currently, and yet will be.
Yep. Exactly. And yet we see that with our Supreme Court. You were just mentioning how Catholic our Supreme Court is. This is our current judges that are on the Supreme Court. And you look at their religions: Catholic, Catholic, Catholic Anglican, Catholic, Protestant.
Is it basically Kagan and Ketanji? They're the only ones?
You only have, 20 to 22% of the U.S. population is actually Catholic.
I remember watching some of the confirmation hearings, specifically of Kavanaugh and then also Amy Coney Barrett. Yeah. And one of the things that Amy Coney Barrett did mention frequently in her confirmation hearings was her conception of legislation and whatnot for the common good.
Yeah.
So this common good principle, which, fundamentally is very much a Catholic principle. Historically, the way it's been enacted in the past has been to steamroll individual liberty.
Right.
Because the rights of the majority are outweighed beyond the rights of the individual.
Do you know who else had common good mentality?
Pharisees.
The Pharisees.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Better one man perish than the whole nation, right?
Right. Yeah. Yep. You have J.D. Vance. You've got Kevin Roberts, her Catholic. Obviously, Kevin Roberts is heavily associated with Project 2025. Trump is surrounding himself with Catholics as far as that goes. So we have one of the most Catholic political systems in this country's history. And simultaneously with that, you're seeing a push towards religion. And, Spirit of Prophecy talks about a false revival that's going to take place. It's going to look like it's the real thing. Oh, look, everybody's going back to church. Everybody's doing that. but we know where that road leads ultimately. A profession of religion has become popular with the world. Rulers, politicians, lawyers, doctors, merchants join the church as a means of securing the respect and confidence of society and advancing their own worldly interest. Thus, they seek to cover all their unrighteous transactions under a profession of Christianity. The various religious bodies, reinforced by the wealth and influence of these baptized worldlings, make a still higher bid for popularity and patronage. Splendid churches, embellished in the most extravagant manner, are erected on popular avenues. The worshippers array themselves in costly and fashionable attire. A high salary is paid for a talented minister to entertain and attract the people. His sermons must not touch popular sins, but be made smooth and pleasing for fashionable ears. Thus, fashionable sinners are enrolled on the church records, and fashionable sins are concealed under a pretense of godliness.
The people worship God with their lips, but their hearts are far from him.
Right. So that's the question that we have to answer for each of our own lives is, are we giving our religion lip service only, or is it meeting our actions?
Heart service.
Heart service. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for further updates, and we'll see you again next time.